Like everyone else, the last few years have been hard. In early 2020, I lost my grandma to pneumonia, and it wouldn't be long before my aunt got sick too and came very close to death herself. It was a lot for a guy my age to handle, but I knew once it was over, I'd be able to see my Faith again. Now Faith and I had met in middle school and quickly fell in love. Our homes were too far apart to see one another very often. Her parents were also super traditional and didn't want her having a boyfriend. And besides school, our only constant form of contact was the telephone. We'd often talk all night and go straight into school without a second of sleep. And in spite of all the odds, we stayed together. The biggest test of our relationship would be high school. Faith's dad bought a new house even further away. That put Faith into a different school district. Now we would see each other even less. I was sure this meant the end of our relationship, but Faith refused to give up. By now we both had computers in our rooms, and we were able to talk and see each other over the internet with webcams. Every day we'd race home from school and talk until early into the next morning. I'd do all my homework during school time so it wouldn't get in the way. Faith did the same. And for the next 3 or so years, this would be our prime avenue of communication. I think we were only able to meet face-to-face a handful of times, and it was hard on both of us. I lost hope more than once, but Faith always lived up to her name and brought me back from the edges of darkness every time. Strangely, despite all the personal sadness that I experienced during the height of the pandemic, Faith and I thrived. Being quarantined worked great for our particular situation. Other than a few hours of school garbage every day, we got to talk uninterrupted all day and night. Even so, not seeing her in person for so long weighed on me. I was doubting our future together, as I had so many times before. Luckily by then, the lockdowns had lifted. Her father would be returning to work, but school remained online. This was the perfect chance for us to be alone together, and I was going to take it. I brought this up with my brother, and he agreed to loan me his car to go see her. A week later, our opportunity arrived. I drove the 35 miles to her house. She rushed me inside and closed the door, and we held one another tightly for a long time. The energy was a bit weird between us, but we overcame it pretty quickly. We rushed off to her room for a little personal time, and I'd forgotten how great being with her was. Unfortunately, our time together was about to be cut short. I had just left her room. Faith was making us a snack when her dad walked in, and he began yelling at me instantly. Things like, "Where's my daughter? What did you do to my little girl?" Faith ran into the room and tried to calm him down, but it didn't help. In his defense, he'd never actually met me. Crazy, I know, considering we'd been together for so long, but our relationship hadn't exactly been normal. We tried to explain the situation, but her dad was just too angry to listen. He looked at Faith and I real closely and sneered, and this would be the point when everything came off the rails. "What had you two been up to?" His expression was so terrifying I didn't dare speak, and he looked back and forth at each of us, but we stayed quiet. "Answer me now. Did you put hands on my little girl?" I remember him saying. Now Faith's dad looked at her and asked her if I'd forced myself on her, and she, acting instinctively, blurted out, "No, we love each other and we've been together since 7th grade. He knew what that meant, and I knew exactly what his expression meant. He gritted his teeth and lunged at me, and he was too fast for me. I was overwhelmed by his size and power, and he grabbed me around the throat with one hand and lifted me off the ground. I was barely able to breathe or swallow. I tried to speak, but he told me to shut up and listen. "I don't care if you two met in kindergarten. You're going to leave here this second and never contact my little girl again. If I ever see you here again, I won't hesitate to kill you." And with that, he let me drop to the floor and shouted at the top of his lungs to get out. He didn't have to repeat himself. I was already out the door before he finished yelling. I started the car and sped away. I was already several miles down the road before I slowed down. I was shaking so badly I could barely keep hold of the wheel. The notifications were going off on my phone, but I didn't care. Odds were high that it was Faith, and I was way too shaken to talk to anyone, especially her. Back at home, I locked myself in my room and tried to calm down. A few hours passed before I got the courage to check my phone, and just as I suspected, Faith had texted and called me at least 5 times since I'd left. I wasn't sure what to do. I talked to my brother about it, and he suggested that I sleep on it before deciding. It was hard, but I did get to sleep at around 3 a.m. When I awoke the next morning, my mind wasn't any clearer. In fact, now that I had time to rest, I was even more traumatized by what had occurred. I couldn't get Faith's dad's angry face out of my head. I honestly believed that he really would kill me if I gave him the chance. I remain in this cycle of indecision to this day. It's almost been 3 years since I communicated with Faith, and I'm still unsure if Eva will. She still sends me texts from time to time, and I read them. It's hard to be out of contact after all the years we've been together, but as long as she lives at home, I'm not willing to risk my life or my family's. I looked into the eyes of evil that day, and I'll never forget it. Faith, if you do hear this or read this, I love you and always will, but your father's a monster. I suggest you get away from him as soon as possible, and until then, we will be doomed to be apart, one heart forever broken in two.
I was around 15 when my dad got a job with the railroad. Now before then, he was an over-the-road truck driver. This job kept him away from home during the week, and Mom and I were lonely a lot, but the money was just too good to turn down. The two of us got used to dealing with things on our own. I learned to cook and do my own laundry during this time. This skill would serve me well later. Neither of my roommates in my first apartment had any clue how to do really anything, and it would be an eye-opening experience and made me appreciate my mom that much more. Maybe we can discuss that sometime later though. Today, I want to tell everyone about something that happened to me during that time of learning. This was when I was about 12. I woke up for school as usual, but quickly realized that I was sick. Now to keep this PG rated, I had stuff spewing out of both ends, if you get my meaning. I tried to be an adult about it, but I fainted in front of my mom and she put me to bed. Although not ideal, I was happy to have the day off from school. I was given a bunch of different medications and quickly passed out. I woke up once or twice to go to the bathroom, but I slept for most of the day otherwise. Just after 2 p.m. though, I awoke refreshed and feeling great. The sick feeling was completely gone, but now I was starving. My first instinct was to run into the kitchen and gorge myself. I decided that that was probably a bad idea. Instead, I took a page from my mom's book and tried some saltines. I'd had good luck with those in the past, and I also grabbed a Sprite while I was there and brought them back to my room. I was close to the bathroom if things went wrong. I had 9 or 10 crackers and half a glass of Sprite, and I waited 30 minutes to see if I'd barf them up. Nothing bad happened, but now I was even hungrier. I thought for a minute before choosing ramen as the safest option. I finished off the bottle of Sprite and made for the kitchen. My mom would be home soon, and under normal circumstances, I would have just waited for her to arrive, but I was so ravenous I couldn't wait any longer. I made ramen for myself several times. I filled the pot and eagerly watched in hopes that the water would boil quicker. It didn't. When the moment finally arrived, I broke up the noodles and added them to the water. A minute later, I poured the flavor packet in. I impatiently stirred until the noodles softened just enough to be edible. I was done waiting. Now the events that followed were likely due to dehydration and overall weakness. I looked around for a pot holder but saw none. There was a hand towel nearby though, so I grabbed for that. The premise was the same. I couldn't see any problems. However, today was not a usual day. I lifted the pot and set it on the counter like I normally do. As I set the towel aside, I realized that it was on fire. I snatched it back up and tossed it into the sink behind me. My hand was slightly burned in the process. The time I wasted worrying about my hand allowed the fire enough time to jump onto the curtains. From this point, I was always a step behind. The water from the faucet extinguished the flames quickly. My split second of satisfaction was destroyed once I noticed the burning curtains above the sink. Having one of those sprayers in my sink would have been perfect for this, but we didn't have one. I attempted to splash water from my hands. It was useless though. The curtains were already consumed, and the fire had now taken hold on the ceiling and the adjoining cabinet. I was so overwhelmed and incapable of coming up with any remedy now. When the fire alarm went off, I gave up and ran out of the house. I opened the front door and ran directly into my mother. She was very calm, and all I could say was, fire. Kitchen. She didn't miss a step after that. To my amazement, she entered the kitchen and opened the door under the sink. Flames were covering the ceiling now. A few came unnervingly close to her, and like a magician pulling a rabbit out of a hat, she withdrew a massive fire extinguisher from under the sink and pointed it at the ceiling, and within seconds, most of the flames on the ceiling were gone. From there, she backtracked to the cabinets and put the flames there out. If I had to guess, I'd say she had the fire completely extinguished in less than 30 seconds. It remains the single most amazing thing I've seen to this day. Mom ran over to check on me. It took a few seconds for me to regain my senses, but once I did, I broke down and cried. I was so relieved I couldn't speak. My mom got out the first aid kit and put some cream on my hands, and the weight of my actions began to dawn on me. I started apologizing over and over, and this made me cry again. Mom calmed me down and assured me that it wasn't a big deal. I couldn't see how it wasn't, but I'd have to rely on her judgment. Some time passed and we discussed what had happened. I expected her to scream at me any second, but she never did. After the excitement had passed, we walked into the kitchen to get a look at the damage. I sheepishly asked her what was going to happen, and her answer caught me completely off guard. Don't worry about it. I only care that you're safe. I'll tell your dad it's my fault. He may grumble a little, what's done is done. I could feel the weight lift off my shoulders in real time. Rather than cry like I wanted to do, I grabbed my mother as tight as possible and held her for a long time. And that's basically how everything occurred that day. After our little family moment ended, Mom and I cleaned up as much as we could. There wasn't really a lot we could do at the time. Dad would have to replace the cabinet before the painting was done. I recall that he wasn't as upset as we had expected. He simply asked if Mom and I were okay and let out a big sigh. A few weeks later, he came home with the cabinet and some cans of paint, and by the following week, the kitchen was looking as good as new. I'm still amazed at how quickly things can go from light-threatening to no big deal. Life's just kind of funny like that. This happened amidst the 2020 lockdown. I used to work in a publishing house as a graphic designer, and my office instructed most of the employees to start working from home. I live alone in a small house. The place I live in is known for its quiet and safe environment. At least that's what I used to think. It was a hot summer night. I was going through tremendous work pressure. It was a tight deadline. My house has a moderately sized living room with an open kitchen area. My bedroom is upstairs, and there's a guest bedroom beside it, which I actually turned into my workplace. My boyfriend and I planned to move in together, hence we rented this house. But before we could officially move in there, the coronavirus outbreak took place, and I was compelled to live alone in that house. Beside my house, there was another house. A middle-aged married couple lived in it. They were always fighting and arguing though. I could hear the woman scream at her husband every night, even though pretty much everyone was annoyed with his family. No one ever dared to confront them. I was just hoping everyone wanted to stay out of the fights just like me. But avoiding trouble is obviously not the way to solve it. It was a Saturday night, and I was talking to my boyfriend sitting in my living room. We were obviously upset about not being able to see each other. The weather outside was cloudy in the afternoon, and a thunderstorm was going on outside now. I was pretty surprised to see how awfully quiet the neighboring couple was. I mean, usually they start yelling at each other in the afternoon. But that day, there was pin drop silence. I finished the call with my boyfriend, and then went to the kitchen to prepare dinner. Though within 5 minutes the rain picked up, and it started to get really heavy. This sudden strike of lightning spooked me a bit. I was chopping vegetables, and the power went out. Alone in a new house amidst a thunderstorm was enough to unsettle my mind. And now with the power cut, I was pretty disturbed if I'm being honest. I lit up a candle and started to search for more just when I heard a knock on my door. I was thinking whether I should open the door or not, just when another huge lightning struck nearby, almost making my ears numb. I walked close to the door and said in a hesitated voice, "Who is it?" No one replied, but again I heard the knocks. I said in a loud voice, "Who are you?" The man replied in a panicked voice, "Ma'am, I live next door. My wife is not feeling well. Can you please open the door?" I recognized the man's voice. I heard that same man's voice screaming at his wife several times. I opened the door, and a flash of lightning made me see his face. The dude was literally sweating. I could tell from his face that something serious had happened. I asked in a worried voice what happened. The man replied with, "My wife isn't feeling well, and I need to get some medicine for her. I can't leave my dog alone in the house. Is there any chance you could keep an eye on him until I come back?" I thought for a second. The man wasn't asking much, so I couldn't say no. I agreed, and the man brought in his dog. It was honestly a really cute dog, but I don't know why the dog was acting strange. Every time the man tried to grab the dog, it kept straying away from him. I was confused. Seeing a pet acting against its owner was not a common occurrence. It was quite evident that for some reason the dog didn't like that man. I took the dog inside and locked the door. I watched the man driving away in his car. What worried me most was that he left his sick wife alone, but was insanely concerned about the dog, even though the dog hates him. I didn't think much of it and got busy cooking dinner again. The storm was growing, heavier and louder. I guess there must have been a huge short circuit, which is why the entire area had lost its power. I finished my dinner and even gave the dog some food to eat. Now my bedroom window is faced towards the bedroom window of that man and his wife. I took the candle upstairs and stood near the window. Even though the house was in complete darkness, the flashes of lightning were showing the bedroom in glimpses. I could see their bed and that someone was lying on it. I thought it was his wife and was probably just sleeping. My sense of curiosity has always been quite low, so I just went to bed and gave the dog a place to sleep beside it. I don't exactly remember what time it was, but I woke up hearing a strange sound. I got up from my bed and went to the window, and that's when I saw two people standing in the bedroom of my neighboring house. The storm had stopped by now, but the power hadn't come back on yet. With the sound of voices, I figured it was a man and a woman. I realized the man had come back, and it must have been him and his wife. I looked at the clock and saw it was 10 p.m. I was leaving early the next day to meet my boyfriend. That's what we planned that evening, so I thought it would be easier if I just returned the dog right then. I was about to go wake up the dog, just when I saw something weird happen in the couple's bedroom. The man and the woman were carrying a third person out of the room. I got closer to the glass just to have a clear look, and just then the power came back on, causing the room's lights to flick on. That's when my stomach dropped in fear. I saw the man was indeed the husband, but the woman he was talking to was not his wife. It was a completely unknown woman I'd never seen before, and both of them were carrying a person on their shoulders. I could easily make out that third person was that man's wife. Her throat was slashed badly, but her blood had dried. It was evident from the look of her body that she had been dead for hours now. They didn't see me watching them, but suddenly the dog barked and the man started looking straight at me. Our eyes met and he rushed out of the house at that moment. I didn't know what to do, but out of fear and panic I too ran downstairs. I knew this man had realized that I now knew his secret. I knew that if this man caught me, there was no way I was getting out of this situation alive. I was a witness of his wife's dead body. I got to the main door and heard the man banging on it. He said in a loud but panicked voice, "Ma'am, I just came to get my dog. My friend is here to help me take my wife to the hospital. We might stay there for a while, so I would appreciate it if you open the door and return my dog to me." I was positive whatever he was telling me was a lie. All he wants now is for me to open the door so he can silence me like his wife. I responded, telling him I was going to call the cops and I knew the whole situation. The man bangs on my door even harder and replied, "You're misunderstanding the situation. Why don't you just return my dog and mind your own business? Open this door right now." I double locked my door so that the man couldn't enter. I then dialed 911 and reported the incident. I was panicking, but as soon as I hung up the call, I heard footsteps running away. Out of my window, I saw the man and the woman hopping in the car and driving away at high speed. When the cops came, they were nowhere to be found. They did discover the wife's dead body laying on the bedroom floor. The entire story unfolded while the cops investigated the matter. The man was having an affair with the woman I saw that night. They planned to murder his wife and vanish her body without anyone's knowledge. That was why the man made up the story about his wife being sick. He must have wanted to use me as an alibi for going out of his house that night. The man planned to come back during midnight and quietly get rid of his wife's body. He would have then had to come to me to get his dog back and stay something like his wife. Left him or something. And after generating that idea in my mind that he had no knowledge of his wife's whereabouts, he would have moved out. In this period of lockdown, people would have hardly gone out of their houses looking for him. The man would have been successful in his plan if he didn't care about his dog so much. My boyfriend finally moved into the house the next day. It was honestly terrifying to stay in the house next door to where your neighbor had been murdered. The cops are still searching for them to this day, and I can only pray that they get caught soon.